My name is Marlene, am 34 years old, and I woke up Christmas Eve morning to 53 notifications on my phone. Half asleep, I reached for it, expecting holiday greetings. Instead, I found myself reading a family group chat I hadn't been removed from by mistake. The message from my mother was clear. All in favor of Marlene not coming to Christmas this year, say I. My heart stopped as I scrolled through the responses. My mother, my father, both my brothers Garrett and Emmett, my sister-in-law Blanche, even my younger sister Hazel, every single one of them had voted yes. The reason given made my blood run cold. She always ruins everything with her attitude. They were planning Christmas without me, but here was the twist that made my shock turn to ice-cold fury. They were having it at my house, the one I bought and paid for entirely on my own. They had no idea what was coming. Before we dive into how I made them regret every single vote, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Have you ever had family take advantage of you? Hit that like button if you think boundaries matter. And subscribe because this story is about to get wild. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when a woman who's been pushed too far finally pushes back. I need you to understand how I became the scapegoat in my own family, because none of this happened overnight. I'm the eldest of 4 children born to Judith and Frank, and from the time I could understand responsibility, I was expected to carry more than my share. My brothers Garrett and Emmett learned early that I would clean up their messes, literally and figuratively. My sister Hazel, being the baby, got away with everything while I was held to impossible standards. When Garrett married Blanche 3 years ago, I gained a sister-in-law who saw me as competition rather than family, and my mother chose her side every single time. I worked 2 jobs all through college while my siblings partied on my parents' dime. I graduated debt-free by choice, not circumstance, saving every penny while living in a cramped studio apartment that barely fit a bed and a desk. I landed a job as a financial analyst right after graduation, and while my siblings were still figuring out their lives, I was building mine with deliberate precision. At 31, I bought my house, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet suburb with a garden I'd dreamed about since childhood. My parents came to the closing, and I remember my father's face showing something like pride while my mother's expression was harder to read. Within 6 months, that look made sense when the requests started coming. It began innocently enough, or so I thought at the time. My mother called in October, 3 years ago, asking if we could host Thanksgiving at my place just this once because their house was being renovated. I said yes immediately, excited to show off my home and prove I could handle hosting a family gathering. That Thanksgiving, I spent $800 on food, decorations, and wine, covering everything because Mom said they'd spent so much on renovations. Christmas followed, then Easter, then every birthday, every minor holiday, every excuse to gather became an event at my house. My siblings started showing up unannounced on weekends, treating my home like a hotel where they could raid the fridge and leave their messes for me to clean. When I finally asked Emmett to at least text before coming over, my mother called me selfish, reminding me that family shouldn't need permission to see family. The real invasion started when Emmett broke up with his girlfriend and asked to stay just a week or 2 in my guest room. That week turned into 8 months of him paying nothing toward rent, utilities, or groceries, while eating everything in sight and leaving wet towels on my hardwood floors. When I suggested he chip in for utilities since his gaming setup was running 24/7, he complained to my mother, who called me greedy. Hazel treated my house like her personal crash pad during college breaks, inviting friends over without asking, and once throwing a party that resulted in red wine stains on my cream carpet that cost $600 to professionally clean. Garrett and Blanche began storing their belongings in my garage, boxes of wedding gifts they never unpacked, furniture they claimed they'd need someday, until my garage looked like their personal storage unit. The financial bleeding was slow enough that I didn't notice until it was gushing. My grocery bill went from $200 a month to over $800. My utility costs doubled, then tripled during the winter when my parents decided my house was warmer than theirs. My carefully curated wine collection, bottles I'd saved for special occasions, disappeared bottle by bottle until the rack was half empty. When I mentioned the costs at a family dinner 6 months ago, my mother's response was delivered with a sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You make so much more money than the rest of us. Why are you being so stingy with family?" That word, stingy, was the first brick in the wall they built around me. The narrative that I was the problem for noticing I was being used. The attitude problem story began at Thanksgiving 6 months ago, the day I learned that setting any boundary at all made me the villain. Blanche had criticized the turkey I'd spent 6 hours preparing, saying it was dry and she could have done better, despite never offering to help or bring anything herself. When I defended my cooking, pointing out that I'd been working since dawn to prepare everything while she showed up 2 hours late, she burst into tears and ran from the table. My mother immediately went to comfort her, shooting me a look of pure disgust before leaving the room. Garrett called me a bitch under his breath. My father told me to apologize, and just like that, I was the one who ruined Thanksgiving. That was when the family narrative shifted permanently. Every boundary I tried to set became more proof that I was difficult, hostile, ungrateful, and unwilling to be a team player in a family that saw me as an ATM machine with a house attached. The full group chat was worse than I could have imagined, and I made myself read every word even though each message felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. The conversation started 3 days before Christmas with my mother's message. We need to discuss the Marlene situation. Not Marlene, not your daughter or your sister, but the Marlene situation, like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person. Blanche jumped in immediately with a 3-paragraph essay about my hostility toward her, citing examples that were actually times I'd asked her to use a coaster or not put her feet on my coffee table. My brother Garrett added his complaints, saying I was too controlling about her house, putting quotes around the words like, my ownership was somehow theoretical rather than legal fact. My father made one weak attempt at defending me, writing, maybe we're being too hard on her, but my mother shut him down within minutes. Frank, she made Blanche cry on Thanksgiving. We need to think about the pregnant woman in this family. That was the first time I learned Blanche was pregnant, finding out in a group chat where they were voting to exclude me from Christmas. Hazel's contribution twisted the knife deeper because she'd always been the one I thought might understand. She wrote about how Eid made her feel unwelcome and judged during her last visit, the visit where Id simply asked her to clean up the kitchen after making herself a midnight snack that left every dish dirty and the counters sticky with spilled juice. Emmett's message made my hands shake with rage. She made me feel like a burden when I was going through the hardest time of my life, conveniently forgetting that his hardest time involved playing video games in my guest room for 8 months without contributing a single dollar. The vote itself was enthusiastic, each family member typing I like they were competing for who could exclude me fastest. The plan they discussed afterward showed this wasn't a spontaneous decision but a calculated move. Blanche wrote, she'll probably go to a friend's house anyway. She always acts like she doesn't need us. My mother added, well, have a much nicer time without her negativity bringing down the mood. They planned every detail, discussing who would bring what dish, what time to arrive, how to arrange the seating without me there. Not one person suggested maybe having Christmas at someone else's house if they didn't want me there. Not one person acknowledged the audacity of excluding me from my own home. They were going to have their perfect family Christmas in the house I'd worked myself nearly to death to afford. And I was supposed to just disappear quietly so they could enjoy my space without the inconvenience of my presence. I sat on my bedroom floor with my phone in my hands, reading and rereading those messages until the words blurred. The tears came first, hot and angry, streaming down my face as I processed the level of betrayal. These were the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, who'd held me as a baby, and taught me to ride a bike and told me family was forever. But their version of forever meant only as long as I was useful, only as long as I provided without complaint, only as long as I made myself small enough to fit into their narrative of who I should be. I paced my bedroom for an hour, wearing a path in the carpet while my mind raced through every memory, seeing them all through this new lens of understanding. Every guilt trip was manipulation. Every criticism was designed to keep me compliant. Every time they made me feel like I was the problem, they were actually revealing who they really were. The shift from devastation to determination happened when I walked through my house, really seeing it for the first time in months. This was my sanctuary, the physical manifestation of every sacrifice I'd made and every goal I'd achieved. I'd chosen the paint colors, arranged the furniture, planted the garden, built this life brick by brick with my own hands and my own money. In the kitchen, I found my mother's serving platters in my cabinets, taking up space like they'd always been there. In the garage, Blanche's storage boxes were stacked against the wall, labeled nursery decorations and baby furniture for a child I didn't even know existed until an hour ago. In my bar, Garrett's expensive whiskey collection lined the shelf, bottles that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. They'd colonized my space so gradually I hadn't noticed until it was complete, and they thought they'd done it so successfully they could erase me entirely while keeping everything it'd provided. I checked the calendar hanging in my kitchen, confirming what I already knew. They'd planned it for Christmas Day tomorrow at 2 p.m., probably figuring I'd sleep late or be too hurt to show up even if I found out. I walked through each room of my house, cataloging every item that wasn't mine, every boundary they'd crossed, every assumption they'd made that my things were their things. The house was entirely in my name, paid for with my down payment and my mortgage payments, but I'd made the mistake of giving my parents a spare key 2 years ago for emergencies. That key had been copied and distributed to my siblings without my knowledge or permission, turning my private home into communal property in their minds, if not in legal fact. I returned to my bedroom and sat at my desk, opening my laptop with hands that had stopped shaking and started planning. They wanted Christmas without me, and they were going to get exactly that. Just not in my house, not in my space, not in my life anymore. My best friend Willa arrived within 30 minutes of my text message that read simply, "Emergency. Need you now." She came through my front door with a bottle of wine in each hand and murder in her eyes before she even knew what happened. I showed her the group chat messages, watching her face transform from concern to absolute fury as she read. When she finished, she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something protective and fierce that made me realize I hadn't been completely alone even when my family made me feel that way. "I knew they were awful," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "But this is actually psychotic. This is some next-level manipulation." She poured us both wine and sat next to me on the couch, and for the first time since reading those messages, I felt like I could breathe. "Whatever you're planning," she said firmly. "I'm in. 100% in." We brainstormed for 2 hours, with Willa asking the practical questions I was too angry to think of clearly. How do you legally keep them out? What proof do you need? What are the consequences if you do this wrong? Her suggestion to document everything before they realized I knew was brilliant, and we started immediately. I took photos of every item belonging to family members scattered throughout my house. Blanche's toiletries lined up in the guest bathroom like she lived there, Emmett's clothes still hanging in the closet of the room had finally vacated, my mother's Tupperware collection filling an entire cabinet. I made detailed lists with estimated values, photographing receipts where I had them. We screenshot every message in the group chat, backing them up to 3 different cloud services because Willa insisted on redundancy. The evidence mounted quickly because there was so much of it. 3 years of exploitation documented in photographs and bank statements and messages that showed premeditation rather than thoughtlessness. The financial documentation was staggering when I actually compiled it with Willa's help organizing spreadsheets. I pulled bank statements going back 3 years, highlighting every grocery bill that had quadrupled when family was visiting, every utility spike during their extended stays, every borrowed $20 that was never returned. My wine collection depletion alone totaled over $2,000. Bottles I'd saved for years disappearing into family dinners where I was simultaneously criticized for my cooking and robbed of my possessions. The damaged furniture told its own story. My coffee table covered in water, rings from glasses set down without coasters, despite my repeated requests, scratches on my hardwood floors from furniture being dragged, a broken shelf in the garage from Garrett's careless stacking of his storage boxes. The calculator on my laptop showed a number that made my stomach turn. $18,400 over 3 years, and that was being conservative with estimates. I called my cousin Iris next, my father's niece who'd been ostracized from family gatherings 5 years ago for the crime of being too independent and not family-oriented enough. What that actually meant was Shed refused to loan my uncle money she knew Shed never see again, but the family narrative painted her as selfish. Iris answered on the first ring, and when I told her what happened, her response was immediate. "Finally." I've been waiting for you to see it. She gave me information that made the betrayal even deeper, explaining that my parents had been trash-talking me to extended family for months, planting seeds for a larger plan. According to Iris, they were planning to ask me to let Garrett and Blanche temporarily move in after Christmas, using Blanche's pregnancy as emotional leverage. The group chat vote wasn't just about Christmas. It was about pushing me into such desperate loneliness that I'd agree to anything to get back into their good graces. They're trying to push you out of your own life, Iris said, her voice hard with anger on my behalf, so they can take it over completely. My final call was to Ted, a lawyer I'd gone to college with, who now practiced property law. His advice was clear and empowering. The house was entirely mine. I could revoke access anytime, and I had every right to ban them from my property with or without cause. He warned me to document everything in case they tried to claim tenancy or some kind of possessory interest, but he said the law was completely on my side. Do what you need to do, he told me, and call me if they escalate. I've got your back. He offered to draft formal trespass notices that would hold up in court if needed, and I accepted gratefully, giving him the names of every family member who'd need one. The plan crystallized with each conversation, each piece of support reminding me that I wasn't wrong for protecting myself. I would change the locks Christmas morning while they were home preparing for their gathering. Then I would appear during their planned celebration to deliver the news in person. Maximum impact. Complete shock. Total reclamation of my space and my life. I went through my home office that evening with new eyes, looking for evidence of deeper violations I might have missed. My filing cabinet was slightly ajar, and I always locked it, a habit from years of handling sensitive financial documents at work. Inside, I found my bank statements and investment records had been moved, papers I kept in meticulous order now slightly shuffled. Someone had been going through my financial information, and in the trash can next to my desk, I found printouts of my most recent pay stub and my savings account balance. The pages were crumpled like someone had printed them, studied them, and disposed of them carelessly. My hands shook as I smoothed out the papers, seeing notes in the margins in handwriting I didn't immediately recognize. Calculations and numbers that showed someone trying to figure out exactly how much money I had. Looking for evidence became searching for what else I'd missed, and in the guest room nightstand drawer, I found something that turned my blood to ice. My mother's earrings, the ones Shed claimed to lose during her last visit, were tucked in the back next to a spiral notebook with Blanche's name written inside the cover. The notebook contained pages of observations about me, my schedule documented with frightening precision. Leaves for work 7:15 a.m., returns 6:30 p.m. most days, goes to gym Tuesdays and Thursdays 7 p.m., book club first Wednesday of month. Below the schedule were lists of valuable items in my house, with estimated prices, my television, my laptop, artwork ID collected, even my grandmother's jewelry that I kept in my bedroom. The final pages detailed what she called pressure points, noting that I responds to guilt about family obligations and becomes defensive when called selfish strategies. For manipulation written out like a manual, the security system I'd installed 6 months ago after a rash of package thefts in the neighborhood became my most valuable asset. I'd never thought to check the footage of family visits, trusting them in my space because they were family. That trust died as I scrolled through months of recordings showing violations I'd never imagined. Garrett and Blanche, letting themselves in when I was at work, walking through my house with Blanche pointing at things and Garrett taking photos on his phone. In one video, clear as day, Blanche was on the phone saying, "The master bedroom will be perfect for the nursery. Well, move that furniture out and paint it yellow." Emmett appeared on camera multiple times at midnight or later, letting himself in to raid my refrigerator and wine collection, taking bottles like he was shopping at a store that never sent bills. The most damning footage was from 3 weeks ago, my mother walking a man in a suit through my house, her voice captured clearly by the audio. "If we can convince my daughter to add us to the deed for estate planning purposes, we'd be interested in these renovations." I found the archived family group chat I hadn't been included in, a thread from 2 months ago titled "The Marlene Problem" that made every hair on my body stand up. They'd been planning this for far longer than Christmas, discussing strategies for how to handle me to get what they wanted. Blanche wrote, "Shay's too attached to her house," emphasizing the word with obvious irritation, We need to make her feel obligated to share it. My mother's response showed careful planning. If we exclude her socially and make her feel isolated, she'll get desperate to get back in our good graces. That's when we suggest she add us to the deed for family unity. Garrett added his thoughts. We can all testify she verbally promised us rights to the house if she tries to fight it later. Emmett, who I'd housed and fed for 8 months, wrote, "She's so desperate to be needed, she'll agree to anything to feel like she matters to us." Hazel's contribution was perhaps the most chilling because she was my baby sister, the one I'd protected and defended. And if she doesn't agree, we can make her life miserable until she does. She has no friends outside us anyway. I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy to steal my life, and I couldn't stop shaking. This wasn't family dysfunction or even ordinary exploitation. This was calculated, premeditated fraud, a long-term plan to legally trap me and take ownership of everything I'd worked for. Every guilt trip had been strategic, every criticism designed to keep me off balance and compliant. Every time they made me feel like I was too sensitive or too selfish, they were actually gaslighting me to hide their intentions. Willa found me there an hour later, tears streaming down my face, the notebook and printouts scattered around me like evidence at a crime scene. She held me while I cried, not saying anything because there was nothing to say that would make this better. When the tears finally stopped, I felt something shift inside me. The last bit of doubt, or guilt, burning away in the face of undeniable proof. "They're not your family," Willa said quietly. "They're con artists who happen to share your DNA." I nodded, wiping my face, and made a decision that would change everything. This wasn't just about Christmas anymore. This was about my entire life, and I was taking it back. Christmas Eve evening, I sat at my kitchen table with spreadsheets and receipts covering every surface, compiling a complete financial reckoning that would leave no room for argument or denial. Every grocery bill saved in my email, every utility statement showing the spikes during their visits, every receipt for damaged items I'd had to replace or repair. The wine collection depletion was documented with photos of my original inventory against current stock, with prices from the wine shop for replacement costs. Furniture damage repair estimates from 3 different contractors gave me hard numbers they couldn't dismiss as exaggeration. The total came to $18,400, and I created individual invoices for each family member, showing their contribution to that number. Willa helped me organize everything into presentation folders with their names on the front, each one a personalized accounting of exactly how they'd exploited me. We moved through my house room by room, boxing up every item that belonged to family members with systematic efficiency. Blanche's decorations came down from the garage shelves, her serving platters carefully wrapped and packed. Garrett's whiskey collection, probably worth more than my car, went into boxes marked fragile with bitter satisfaction. My mother's entire Tupperware empire filled 3 boxes, along with kitchen tools shed gradually colonized from my cabinets. My father's tool collection from the garage, Emmett's remaining clothes and toiletries, Hazel's books and college storage boxes that shed left temporarily 2 years ago. Everything was cataloged, photographed, and packed. The boxes lined my garage in neat stacks, labeled with names in thick black marker. Willa suggested we inventory each box in writing, documenting exactly what we were returning to whom, and I agreed, creating lists that would prevent any later claims that I'd kept or damaged their belongings. The locksmith was scheduled for 7 a.m. Christmas morning, confirmed and reconfirmed because I couldn't afford any mistakes in timing. I stayed up until 2 a.m., adrenaline making sleep impossible, writing out exactly what I would say during the confrontation. I practiced different scenarios, how to handle tears, anger, manipulation attempts, every tactic my family had used successfully on me for years. Willa slept in the guest room, her presence a reminder that I had support beyond the people who'd betrayed me. I walked through every room of my house in the darkness, touching walls I'd painted and furniture I'd chosen, reacquainting myself with the space that was supposed to be my sanctuary. This house represented every sacrifice, every extra shift worked, every night of choosing, saving over spending, and they'd tried to take it from me while making me feel guilty for noticing. Tomorrow, I would make sure they understood it was mine, fully and completely, with no room for their assumed rights or entitled access. I spent the last hours before dawn printing copies of everything: the group chat messages, the financial records, the security camera footage screenshots. Each family member would get their own folder showing not just their individual exploitation, but the conspiracy that all participated in. I included the notebook pages from Blanche, the real estate agent footage, the archived chat about the Marlene problem. Everything that proved this was planned and intentional, rather than thoughtless. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, and I felt something like peace settling over me as I finished the last folder. They'd tried to make me doubt myself, to believe I was the problem, but facts didn't lie. Numbers didn't gaslight. Security footage didn't manipulate. I had truth on my side, and truth was more powerful than their narratives. I made phone calls for my own Christmas celebration, creating something real to look forward to after the confrontation I knew would be devastating. Despite being necessary, Cousin Iris agreed immediately to come at 5 p.m., bringing her husband Randall and offering to handle all the food. 2 college friends who'd also survived toxic families said yes without hesitation, bringing wine and desserts and the kind of non-judgmental support it'd been craving. This Christmas would be about people who actually valued me as a person rather than a resource. 5 people who respected boundaries and understood consent and wouldn't dream of voting me out of my own life. I ordered backup catering just in case, wanting everything to be perfect for the people who deserved my effort and care. The contrast wasn't lost on me, planning a celebration with chosen family while preparing to evict blood family. But that contrast showed me exactly how far it'd come in 24 hours. At midnight, as Christmas Eve became Christmas Day, I stood in my living room, looking at the home I'd nearly lost. The house felt different already, lighter somehow, like it knew freedom was coming. Some extended family would stay in touch after this, and many wouldn't. But I was genuinely okay with that realization. Quality mattered more than quantity in relationships, and I'd been choosing quantity at the expense of my own peace and safety. My phone alarm was set for 6 a.m. Everything was prepared, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt like the adult I'd worked so hard to become. Tomorrow, I would show my family the woman they'd created by pushing me too far, and then I would close the door on them forever. The thought didn't make me sad anymore. It made me free. The alarm at 6 a.m. pulled me from restless sleep into crystalline focus, the kind of clarity that comes from having absolutely no doubt about what needs to be done. Willa was already awake, coffee brewing, both of us moving with quiet purpose through the house. The locksmith arrived at 7 a.m. precisely, professional and mercifully incurious about why someone needed all their locks changed on Christmas morning. I watched him work on the front door first, drilling out the old lock and installing a new deadbolt that gleamed brass and impenetrable in the winter sunlight. The back door, the garage entrance, the side gate, every point of entry secured with fresh locks and keys that only I would possess. The sound of the drill was satisfying, each completed lock another layer of protection between me and people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted with access to my space or my life. I set up my laptop in the living room, positioned to record the confrontation, making sure the audio would capture everything clearly. The evidence folders were arranged on the entryway table where they'd be visible immediately, each family member's name facing out like place cards at a dinner party they weren't invited to. Willa positioned herself in the kitchen with a clear sightline but out of immediate view, moral support without interference. Cousin Iris texted at 8 a.m., confirming her 4 p.m. arrival and asking if I needed anything, the kind of checking in that actual family does. Everything was ready, and I felt eerily calm, the kind of peace that comes from knowing you're doing something difficult but absolutely necessary. The group chat exploded with activity, starting at noon, family members coordinating their arrival times with the casual entitlement of people who believed they owned access to my space. Mother wrote, "Everyone be there by 2 p.m. sharp. Well, have Christmas started before anyone notices." The delusion was breathtaking. The assumption that I wouldn't notice or wouldn't care about being excluded from a celebration in my own home. I watched the messages stack up, each one adding fuel to my resolve. Garrett asking who was bringing what dish. Emmett confirming he'd bring beer, using my address like it was a public venue rather than private property. Not one person expressed doubt or guilt about what they were doing. and that told me everything I needed to know about who they really were underneath the family label. At 1:45 p.m., I positioned myself by the front window, watching cars pull into my driveway with the detached interest of someone watching a show about someone else's life. My mother and father arrived first. My mother's arms full of wrapped presents, my father carrying a cooler. I watched my father try his key in the lock, seeing his confusion when it didn't work, trying again like maybe had used the wrong key by mistake. The doorbell rang, and I let it, watching through the window as more cars arrived. Garrett and Blanche pulled up, Blanche's pregnant belly visible even through her winter coat, carrying dishes covered in foil. Emmett on his motorcycle, Hazel arriving with a boyfriend I'd never met named Sterling. They clustered on my porch like carolers, growing increasingly agitated as they realized none of their keys worked. I let them ring the doorbell and knock for 5 full minutes, watching panic and confusion spread through the group. My mother's voice carried through the door, sharp with irritation. Why isn't anyone's key working? Did she change the locks? The dawning realization that I knew, that I'd done this deliberately, rippled through them visibly. Garrett tried his key 3 more times, like force of will could make it work, and I felt something like satisfaction watching their entitled assumptions crumble. Finally, I opened the door, standing in the doorway with my body blocking entry, looking at the faces of people I'd loved my entire life and feeling absolutely nothing but cold determination. My mother's face cycled through confusion to irritation to attempted sweetness in seconds. "Marlene," she said brightly, like nothing was wrong. "What are you doing here? We thought you'd be with friends." "At my own house?" I said calmly, each word deliberate. "On Christmas?" The silence was profound, everyone frozen in place, presents and dishes held awkwardly. Blanche tried to push past me with her usual aggressive entitlement, saying, "Let us in. We have food in the car that needs to be refrigerated." I didn't move, didn't budge an inch, and said the single word that would change everything. No. It hung in the cold air between us, simple and absolute. Garrett's face flushed red immediately, his default response to not getting his way. "What do you mean? No. Stop being dramatic and let us in." I pulled out my phone, pulled up the group chat, and held it where everyone could see. "I mean, you're not coming into my house. I saw the vote. All of you voting to exclude me from Christmas. So I'm voting you out, permanently." My mother's face transformed in an instant, attempting damage control with the skill of someone who'd been manipulating people for decades. "Honey, that was all a misunderstanding. We were just discussing options. We never meant for you to see that." I cut her off, my voice colder than the December air surrounding us. "No misunderstanding. You voted me out of Christmas, planned to have it in my house without me, and thought it'd just disappear quietly. That ends today." My father tried his reasonable voice, the one he used when he wanted to seem like the rational parent. "Let's go inside and discuss this calmly like adults." I shook my head slowly, deliberately. "You're not coming inside. Not today, not ever again. This is my house, and you're not welcome in it anymore." Hazel started crying, which had always been her most effective manipulation tactic, tears streaming down her face as she wailed, "You're ruining Christmas. How can you be so cruel?" I looked at her directly. This sister I'd protected and defended and housed countless times, and felt nothing but contempt. "I'm ruining Christmas? Read your own messages, Hazel. You voted to exclude me from my own home." Emmett tried a different approach, downplaying the severity like he always did when caught. "We were just venting. Everyone complains about family sometimes. You're taking this way too seriously." I pulled out the folders from the entryway table, handing one to each adult, watching their faces as they registered their names on the covers. "Open them," I commanded, and for once, they obeyed without argument. The silence as they read was beautiful, each face going through distinct stages of shock, guilt, and defensive anger. Garrett's hands shook slightly, holding papers showing the archived chat about the Marlene problem, his eyes scanning the messages had written about testifying against me if needed. Blanche went pale, reading the notebook entries in her own handwriting. Strategies for manipulation laid bare and undeniable. My mother's face flushed deep red, seeing the financial accounting. $18,000 broken down by category with receipts attached. My father stared at the security camera screenshots showing my mother touring my house with a real estate agent, his expression for once showing something like shame. Emmett's folder included every midnight visit captured on camera, time-stamped evidence of theft disguised as family access. The denial phase lasted less than a minute before rage took over, Garrett exploding with typical aggression. "You can't lock us out. We're family, you don't get to just decide we're not welcome." I held up my phone, showing more security footage, my voice steady and cold. Family doesn't plot to steal each other's houses. Family doesn't manipulate and gaslight and conspire. You're not family. You're con artists who happen to share my DNA. Blanche's shriek was piercing, her hand on her pregnant belly like a shield. "Impregnant, you're going to traumatize my baby by excluding us on Christmas." I showed her the video of her walking through my house planning which room would be the nursery. Her own voice clear on the audio. "You were planning to take over my master bedroom for that baby without asking." My security cameras caught everything. Garrett lunged for my phone, trying to grab it and delete the evidence, but I stepped back quickly. "Where did you get that? You can't record us without permission." I almost laughed at the audacity. In my own house, I can absolutely have security cameras on my own property, and they caught all of you. Every violation, every theft, every manipulation. I played more clips, a greatest hits compilation of their exploitation. My mother with the real estate agent discussing adding her name to my deed. Emmett taking bottles from my wine collection at 2 a.m. Garrett and Blanche photographing my rooms and discussing furniture placement. Each clip hit like a bomb, undeniable video evidence that destroyed every excuse they could possibly make. The manipulation phase came next because it always did, my mother switching tactics with practiced ease. "You're having a breakdown, sweetheart. We're worried about you." This paranoia isn't healthy. It was textbook gaslighting, trying to make me doubt my own perception of reality. "Maybe you need to talk to someone, a professional who can help you see this more clearly." I smiled, a cold expression that had nothing to do with humor. "I'm seeing clearly for the first time in years. I see exactly what you are and what you've been doing." My father tried his version of wisdom, the disappointed parent routine. "Think about what you're throwing away here. Family is forever, and you're destroying it over a misunderstanding." I met his eyes directly, watching him flinch at whatever he saw in mine. "What am I throwing away? People who use me, who plotted to steal my house. That's not family. That's exploitation, and I'm done being exploited." Hazel grabbed my arm, trying physical contact when emotional manipulation failed. "We love you. This is all just a terrible misunderstanding. We never meant to hurt you." I removed her hand from my arm firmly. "Love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't vote someone out. Love doesn't conspire and manipulate. This isn't love, and I'm done pretending it is." Blanche tried her final appeal, the sympathy card played with desperation. "Where are we supposed to go now? You're leaving us with nowhere to have Christmas." I gestured to the boxes in the garage, visible through the open door. "That's not my problem anymore. Your belongings are packed and ready. You'll take them now and leave my property." The family stared at the boxes, the physical manifestation of their exile, and reality finally sank in. My mother made one last attempt, her voice breaking with what might have been genuine emotion. "You can't be serious about this. You can't just cut us off completely." I pulled out the formal trespass notices Ted had prepared, handing one to each adult family member. The legal letterhead made it real. Official documentation that this wasn't an emotional outburst, but a legally enforceable decision. "These are trespass notices. If any of you enter my property without explicit written permission, I will call the police and press charges. I'm done." My father's hand shook reading his notice, the legal language making everything suddenly concrete. "You'd really have your own father arrested?" I nodded once, firmly. "You toured my house with a real estate agent behind my back, planning to steal it legally. Yes, I'd have you arrested." The neighbors were watching now, faces appearing in windows, drawn by the raised voices and obvious drama. My family became aware of the audience, their public image cracking along with their plans. Garrett started loading boxes into his car with violent, jerky movements, his face red with fury. "You're going to regret this. Family is forever, and you're making a huge mistake." I watched him struggle with a heavy box, making no move to help. "Family is forever, but property ownership is documented. This is my house, and it's staying mine." Blanche was crying openly now, not the manipulative tears but genuine distress as she realized they'd lost. "We needed your help. Is that so wrong?" I shook my head slowly. Needing help and plotting to steal are completely different things. You didn't want help. You wanted ownership. And you were willing to destroy me to get it. One by one, they loaded their boxes, the physical removal of their belongings from my space, cathartic in its finality. My mother made one last attempt as she carried a box to her car, her voice carrying across the yard. "You're going to spend Christmas alone. Is that really what you want?" I smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness it felt all day. "I'm not alone. I have people coming at 5 p.m., people who actually value me, none of whom are you." That was the final blow. The revelation that I'd planned my own celebration, that I didn't need them at all. My mother's face crumpled, and for a moment, I saw something like understanding cross her features before pride closed it off. She loaded the last box into her car without another word, and I watched my family drive away one by one, taking their boxes and their assumptions and their entitlement with them. I stood in my doorway watching until the last car disappeared, and then I closed the door, locked it with my new key, and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 3 years. Within an hour of my family leaving, my phone started exploding with messages from extended family members who'd been fed my mother's version of events. The narrative was predictable and infuriating. I'd had a breakdown, kicked them out for no reason, destroyed Christmas because of my mental health issues. My mother's message to the extended family group chat was a masterpiece of manipulation. "I'm so worried about Marlene. She's clearly going through something and won't accept help. We tried to include her in Christmas, and she locked us out and became hostile. Please keep her in your prayers." The responses flooded in, concerned relatives asking what they could do, how they could help poor Judith deal with her troubled daughter, and I watched the lies spread like wildfire through my family tree. I let them stack up for 10 minutes, watching the narrative solidify, and then I created a new group chat including every extended family member I had contact information for. The message I posted was simple: "Here's what actually happened," followed by complete documentation. I posted the voting chat showing every family member excluding me. I posted the financial records showing $18,000 of exploitation. I posted the archived Marlene problem chat showing the conspiracy to steal my house. I posted video clips of my mother with the real estate agent, Emmett stealing from my wine collection, Garrett and Blanche planning to take over my bedroom. The response was immediate and profound. The silence in the group chat stretching for almost 5 minutes as people processed what they were seeing. Cousin Iris was first to respond, her message validating years of her own experience. "I've been saying this for years. Judith and Frank have been manipulating and using people for decades. Marlene is just the first one brave enough to fight back publicly." My Aunt Dorothy, my mother's sister, posted next with surprising honesty. "Judith, this is appalling. I can't believe you did this to your own daughter." Uncle Raymond added his voice, addressing my father directly. "Frank, you stood by while they plotted to steal from your daughter? What happened to you?" The tide turned completely as more relatives reviewed the evidence, extended family members I barely knew posting their support, and sharing their own stories of my parents borrowing money and never repaying, making promises and never keeping them, using family obligations as weapons. My grandmother Helen, my father's mother, called me directly, her voice shaking with fury. I'd never heard from her before. "I taught my son better than this, and I'm ashamed of what he's become. You're welcome at my house anytime, holidays or otherwise, and they're not welcome until they make this right." Her public support meant everything. The family matriarch taking my side, destroying my parents' attempt to isolate me. Other relatives reached out privately, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years sharing stories about my parents trying to manipulate them financially, a pattern of exploitation that went back decades. I wasn't their only victim, just their most successful target because they'd had access to my space and my resources for years. The realization that they'd done this to others made my anger burn colder and cleaner, righteous fury rather than personal hurt. My mother attempted damage control on social media, posting a public message about being heartbroken over her ungrateful daughter, playing up Blanche's pregnancy, and painting a picture of a pregnant woman left on the street on Christmas. The comments started sympathetic, friends and acquaintances offering support and condolences, until people started posting links to the evidence I'd shared with extended family. Iris shared the full story publicly, tags and all, and suddenly my mother's post was flooded with comments calling out the manipulation. "You tried to steal her house," someone wrote. "This is financial abuse, not ingratitude. She's the victim here, not you." My mother's carefully crafted public image crumbled in real time, friends distancing themselves, acquaintances sharing the post with commentary about toxic parents. My father's professional reputation took a hit when his employer saw the posts, someone from his office apparently connected to someone in my extended family. Working in financial services while being exposed for attempting fraud against your own daughter wasn't a good look, and I heard through Iris that his boss had called him in for a conversation about ethics and public perception. I didn't have to fight back at all, because the truth fought for me, spreading through social networks and family connections with the unstoppable momentum of facts over fiction. People were calling my parents directly, extended family and friends telling them off, and my mother's phone number ended up shared publicly when someone posted it suggesting people call and share their thoughts about her behavior. Garrett sent threatening text messages starting around 6 p.m. Legal threats about suing me for emotional distress, defamation, unlawful eviction, every legal term he could think of despite having no case whatsoever. I forwarded every threat to Ted, who responded with barely contained glee. "Please, let him sue. Discovery will be absolutely beautiful, and he'll enjoy taking his money in legal fees." Garrett's lawyer, when he actually consulted one, apparently refused to take the case after seeing the evidence, telling him he had no grounds and would lose spectacularly. Blanche tried a different approach with apologetic texts claiming she'd been influenced by Garrett's family and didn't realize how wrong it all was. I didn't respond because her apology was strategy rather than remorse, an attempt to get back in my good graces rather than genuine understanding of the harm she'd caused. Emmett showed up at my house drunk at 9 p.m., pounding on the door and shouting that I couldn't treat family this way. I called the police without hesitation, watching through the window as they arrived, and arrested him for trespassing when I showed them the formal trespass notice had been served that afternoon. He spent Christmas night in jail, and I felt not an ounce of guilt, because had been warned explicitly and chose to violate my boundaries anyway. Hazel sent essay-length text messages, paragraphs mixing apology with blame, saying she was sorry but it always made her feel inadequate and insecure. The non-apology apology didn't deserve a response, her inability to take full responsibility, showing she still didn't understand that her feelings didn't justify her actions. I blocked all their numbers by 10 p.m., the notifications finally stopping, peace descending as I cut off their access to me completely. At 5 p.m., hours before the drama escalated, my actual Christmas celebration happened with the people who deserved my time and energy. Cousin Iris arrived with Randall, bringing enough food to feed twice our number, wrapping me in a hug that felt like absolution. Willa and her partner Nina brought wine and the kind of non-judgmental presence that comes from true friendship. My college friends Maxine and Tabitha arrived with desserts and stories about their own toxic family experiences, understanding in their eyes that came from lived experience. We sat around my dining table, 6 people who'd chosen to be there, sharing food and stories and genuine laughter that filled my house with joy instead of tension. Iris raised her glass in a toast, her voice warm with pride. To Marlene, who chose herself and taught us all that it's okay to protect your peace, we all drank, and I felt lighter than I had in years, surrounded by chosen family who valued consent and boundaries and mutual respect. 3 weeks into January, I sat in my home office looking out at a snow-covered yard, my house quiet and peaceful in a way it hadn't been in years. The silence was no longer lonely but restorative, the absence of unexpected visitors and guilt-inducing phone calls, creating space for me to breathe and think, and simply exist without apology. My security system showed only delivery drivers and the mail carrier, no one letting themselves in uninvited, no one assuming they owned access to my space. The locks I'd changed Christmas morning had held against all attempts to breach them. Physical barriers, protecting emotional boundaries I should have set years ago. Some extended family had stayed in touch, Iris and grandmother Helen, and a handful of cousins who'd always been kind. Most of my immediate family hadn't contacted me except through their lawyers, legal threats that went nowhere because truth was on my side. Ted had finalized everything legally, formal cease and desist letters sent to my parents and each sibling requiring all contact to go through him. My mother tried once more through her lawyer, requesting mediation and family counseling, framing it as an attempt at reconciliation. My response through Ted was firm and final. No, we're done. There's nothing to mediate. Garrett attempted to claim tenants' rights based on storing items in my garage, arguing Head established residence through property possession. His lawyer withdrew from the case after seeing the documentation showing Head never paid rent, never had a lease, and had been explicitly told to remove his belongings. Blanche's lawsuit for psychological damage was dismissed before it even made it to court. The judge, apparently unimpressed by her claim that being denied access to someone else's house constituted actionable harm. I started therapy in the second week of January. Finding Dr. Simmons through a referral from Willa, and the work of unpacking 3 decades of family dysfunction was difficult but necessary. We talked about how I'd been trained from childhood to be the family fixer, the responsible one who solved everyone's problems while neglecting her own needs. Dr. Simmons helped me see the patterns I'd been too close to recognize, how every boundary I tried to set was met with punishment disguised as concern, how my family weaponized my desire to be a good daughter against me. The realization that I couldn't help people who saw me as a resource rather than a person was liberating and devastating in equal measure. Grief for what I'd never had, mixing with relief at finally being free. The guilt came in waves during those first weeks. Cultural messaging and childhood programming, whispering that family was everything and I'd committed an unforgivable sin by choosing myself. Dr. Simmons walked me through it, session by session, helping me understand that real family doesn't require you to destroy yourself to prove your love, that boundaries aren't cruelty but basic self-respect. I learned that I'd been living in a constant state of hypervigilance, always waiting for the next demand or criticism, and the absence of that stress was revealing how much energy I'd been spending just surviving my own family. The work was hard, processing anger and grief and betrayal while also recognizing my own role in allowing the dynamic to continue for so long. My social life expanded in ways I hadn't expected. Regular dinners with Iris and Randall, becoming a standing date I actually looked forward to. Game nights with Willa and Nina filled my house with laughter instead of tension. Friends who asked permission before coming over and brought food to share rather than expecting me to provide everything. I joined a book club with Maxine and Tabitha, meeting new people who knew nothing about my family drama and related to me as a complete person rather than a role. Dating felt possible again after years of being too exhausted from family management to consider it, and when I met Fletcher at a friend's party in late January, his reaction to my story was everything I needed to hear. "You're incredibly strong," he said simply. Not pitying or judgmental, but genuinely impressed. Most people never find the courage to choose themselves. My house became mine again in those 3 weeks, not just legally but spiritually, a sanctuary I'd reclaimed from people who treated it like communal property. I redecorated the guest room that Emmett had occupied, painting over the marks Head left, and making it into a proper office space I'd always wanted. I replaced damaged furniture with pieces I chose carefully, investing in my space without worrying about who might damage them. The wine collection slowly rebuilt with bottles I would actually drink rather than discover missing. I hosted my first dinner party in early February, 8 people carefully chosen for their genuine kindness and respect, and the evening felt like a celebration of everything I'd survived and chosen and built. My parents tried one final contact through grandmother Helen, asking when I was coming back to the family, and I gave Helen my answer to relay back. "I am with my family, the one I chose. Tell them I'm doing wonderfully." Helen reported that my mother cried. My father got angry, and both of them still didn't understand why I wouldn't just forgive and forget. That lack of understanding told me everything I needed to know about whether reconciliation was possible or desirable. They hadn't changed, hadn't taken responsibility, hadn't even acknowledged the full scope of what they'd done. The absence of apology or accountability made my decision clear and guilt-free. I kept journals throughout those 3 weeks, processing everything in writing, and the lessons that emerged were hard-won wisdom I wanted to remember. Blood doesn't obligate you to accept abuse or exploitation. Setting boundaries protects your peace and isn't an act of cruelty but of self-preservation. People show you who they are through their actions, and believing them the first time saves years of pain. You teach people how to treat you by what you accept, and it taught my family that I would tolerate anything. Sometimes the strongest form of love is letting go of people who harm you, even when they share your DNA. Your home should be your sanctuary, not a resource for others to exploit. Chosen family can be truer and more supportive than biological family. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish but necessary for survival. You don't owe anyone access to your life, your space, or your resources, regardless of shared genetics. Peace is priceless, and protecting it is worth the temporary pain of making hard choices. On a quiet evening 3 weeks after Christmas, I sat by my living room window watching snow fall on my neighborhood, my house warm and peaceful around me. This space was finally, completely mine. No unwelcome keys floating around, no entitled visitors assuming access, just me and the life I was building on my own terms. My phone buzzed with a text from Willa asking about weekend plans, and I responded with genuine enthusiasm about brunch and maybe a movie. This was what family felt like when it was healthy. People who asked rather than demanded, who respected rather than exploited, who loved without conditions or expectations of servitude. I thought about the group chat from Christmas Eve, my entire family voting to exclude me from Christmas, and I smiled at the memory that had once brought tears. They'd voted me out, thinking it would hurt me, but instead, they'd freed me. They took away their conditional love, and I discovered I didn't need it. I had my house, my peace, my chosen family, and myself, and that was more than enough. I stood at my window, watching neighbors going about their evening routines. Ordinary people living ordinary lives without the drama and manipulation Id thought was normal. My house was quiet but not lonely, peaceful but not isolated, mine in every sense that mattered. The last 3 weeks had been hard, full of difficult conversations and painful realizations and necessary boundaries, but Id survived them and come out stronger on the other side. My family probably thought I was miserable, alone, filled with regret about choosing myself over them. They were wrong about everything, because I'd never been happier, never felt more secure, never known this kind of peace was possible. My final thought before closing the curtains and settling in for the evening was simple and true. They voted me out of Christmas, and I voted myself into a better life. It was the best decision I ever made, and I would make it again in a heartbeat. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect yourself? Drop a comment below sharing your story because you're not alone, and your experience matters. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button to help other people find it who might need to hear that choosing yourself is okay. Subscribe to this channel for more stories about standing up for yourself and setting boundaries even when it's hard. Share this video with someone who needs to know that family doesn't mean accepting abuse, and that your peace is worth protecting no matter what. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and I hope it gave you the courage to protect your own peace however you need to. Wishing you all the strength to set boundaries, the wisdom to recognize when people show you who they are, and the peace that comes from choosing yourself. You deserve sanctuary, not struggle, in your own life, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Until next time, take care of yourselves.